Hello, everybody. We're going to give everybody a couple more seconds to get in the room and get logged in, and we'll start here in a minute. I'd like to welcome everybody to the fourth session of our supply chain webinar series. My name is David Carrick. I'm the Associate Director of the West Virginia University Industrial Extension. Um, for those of you who've joined us before, welcome back. And for those of you who may be new to us, welcome. The WU Industrial Extension has received funding to support these education sessions about supply chain in order to help small manufacturers build a domestic supply chain for our products. The more we make in America, the stronger our manufacturing economy becomes. And ideally, the more we can do in West Virginia, the better it is for us. We want to provide information to as many manufacturers as possible to understand what supply chain really means and how West Virginia companies can use a practical approach to enter new markets if they're interested and capable. While as a center, the WVU Industrial Extension doesn't currently offer specific services called supply chain, we want to learn as much as we can about the interests, needs, and questions you all may have so that we can create services to support growth in West Virginia. It's important to us that we give you the best information possible. So to do that, we have Adam Lowe from Orchard Tree Solutions with us today to talk about supply chain. He's an expert in supply chain management and has a practical approach to understanding and applying it. For those of you new to us, Adam's a native West Virginian, graduated from WVU, served in the military in addition to having experience working with a Tier 1 DoD supplier. He's also started a consulting practice to support this nationwide effort and bring manufacturing back to America. We'll be recording these sessions so you can play them back as needed and catch up on anything you may have missed in the previous sessions or take any notes. So if you have any questions, put those in the chat. I'll be keeping an eye on that to make sure we get as many questions answered as possible. And with that, I'll turn it over to Adam. Thanks for being here with us today.
Thanks, Dave. I appreciate it. And, I just really appreciate what you're doing there with the WVU IE group, bringing in folks like me and folks who are much better than me to give good advice to the manufacturers in the state of West Virginia and surrounding areas. So really, really greatly appreciate that. As you said, I am from the state, so my heart lies in West Virginia, even though my body is standing in Maryland right now. But I'm happy to be able to come back in and help and take what I've learned and kind of distribute that out. And as you said, that's one of my goals for my company was to go back into the state of West Virginia and really help the economy there. So greatly appreciate the opportunity. Thank you all for putting these things together. And we'll just jump right in. I want to thank everybody for coming back. For those who have been here before, for those who might be new, welcome. This is a good one to jump in on. This is probably the most practical of the series of 5 webinars that we're going to do. We're on number 4 right now. And I'll go ahead and advance the slide a little bit. We today are going to be talking about common pitfalls to avoid. So last webinar, we discussed kind of the ideal state for a supplier, what those of us who are consumers, what we would really like to see in our supply base, and the proper ways of operating and kind of best case scenario. So this week I'm going to review just a little bit about what we've talked about in the past few sessions, and then I'm going to jump into a kind of assessing your operation and addressing the opportunities. And so we'll base a lot of the discussion today off of last week's webinar, and I'll take kind of those areas of the operation that could go a little south, and we'll talk about how we assess that, how we can determine that, how we get to a root cause that's causing the issue, and then how we can correct that in operations. A lot of this will be somewhat higher level as far as thought processes and systems we can put in place to help our operation and help our overall kind of supply chain group and supply chain operations. But there are some very practical elements of things that we can all do that will be helpful to your individual operation. And in the long term, you'll see successes out of those elements. And I will say that kind of right off that a lot of this is a marathon. So don't think of these things as a sprint as much as it is a marathon. We're talking long-term elements that are kind of the bread and butter that you can put in place that will work over time. I know we all love to see those 10 great things you can do to make the very best business possible on YouTube. This is not really one of those. These are the practical elements of things that you can do daily, weekly, monthly, yearly to ensure that you're having long-term success, slow and steady. From my experience, that's kind of how you do it. How you can kind of predict that you're going to have a successful operation long term is by slow and steady, putting elements in place that are going to last, and thinking about it in terms of long term success and not just short wins. Now there will be short wins, and some of these things that we'll talk about today will lead to short wins. Absolutely, they will. But that's not what we're looking for overall. Short wins are great, but they wear off pretty quickly. So we're not looking for band-aid fixes. We're looking for long-term fixes in today's lessons. So let me jump into the review because I do have a lot to talk about on the backside of this. So I don't want to spend a ton of time reviewing, but I do like to kind of show that we're building here. So we're building from session one. Session one started with alignment and aligning your company with your company values, mission, your why. And the way I define it, the why is kind of like, you know what you do and you know how you do it most likely, but why you're doing it is very important as well, because you want to align that portion of your job with your supply chain group if you have a supply chain group. And as I've mentioned several times, lots of us wear lots of hats. So there might not be one specific supply chain group. It might be someone who does supply, who does purchasing, invoicing, sales, the whole deal. But we're kind of working off of the framework of large scale supply chain. So large scale supply chain being your entire operation is a member on or a link of that supply chain. So you most likely, unless you're getting raw natural resources out of the ground, you're starting out by buying some supplies, and even those operations buy consumable items and things like that. So you have a supply chain. There's someone who's giving you something, you're adding some value to it in your operation, and then you're passing that on down the line to a consumer. It could be the final consumer. It could be another company that's going to add more value and continue on down the lane. So that's kind of the idea of what we're talking about, more large scale, big picture supply chain. And that's what we talked about a lot in session one, was aligning your company, specifically because your supply chain is going to have a lot of exterior or outside of your company influence and involvement and networking opportunities. So making sure that those groups that you're coupling with kind of align to what your company is doing as well can be an important piece. Another element of our first session was looking and using that supply chain network, looking outside of your company for other opportunities for revenue. So using that network, thinking bigger, thinking for other ways that you can supply, maybe things you don't even already make today, looking for potential solutions for people, and using your processes that you have in place today or your systems that you have in place today to supply those solutions. It can be knowledge, it can be a physical product, it can be a lot of different things, but like teaching your supply chain folks to look for those opportunities and thinking in a bigger way about what your opportunities may be and what your operation may be able to provide to a customer or even to your vendors. A lot of the times it can work that way as well. When you are consuming an item from a vendor, they might need help with something as well that you can support them with. So looking kind of both ends of your business as far as the supply chain is concerned, looking for opportunities there for revenue. Then we moved into session two, and that was supply chain 101. It was kind of a base level review of a somewhat typical process of development of a product all the way through shipment of the product. And we kind of hit several different areas in the middle and talked. It was very definition heavy a session. But it's worthwhile if you're brand new to supply chain or you haven't been involved, or maybe you've been in an operations centric role and you haven't been involved with supply chain much, to review that. We also sent out some terms that kind of have my definition of those different elements that we spoke about. It's good to just kind of understand the lingo. If you're sitting at a table that is going to involve, a supply chain element, you're going to be discussing maybe delivery, you're going to be discussing the quality of your product that you're creating, and you're sitting there as a supply chain person, or, you're representing operations, to understand some of that lingo that you might hear at a table if you're, discussing terms and conditions or even operations pieces. Then we moved into session three, and that was last week, and we talked about cost, speed, and quality, and rarity as four main elements. And these are four that I've popped out. You can kind of slice these off into some different elements that might be kind of selling points for your operation and for your products. But these are the four that I kind of settled in on that you're going to use most likely to kind of pivot yourself as a key supplier for an element. The interesting thing about all of these is, again, your vendors who are supplying you with material need to fall into your strategy as it relates to these elements as well. So if you are a cost-centric company, your vendors have to also be cost-centric, in their thought. You can't buy a ton of very, very, very expensive subcomponents and then be the cheapest or the least expensive kind of player in the market. So all of that has to kind of flow into your supply chain kind of thought processes and strategy. Same thing with speed, same thing with quality and rarity, those different elements of what you're trying to pivot and how you're trying to market your own company. And again, as a member of that supply chain, as a link on that supply chain, having a congruent and understanding of your company why, your company vision and mission, and fitting that into your supply chain operations is very important because you don't want to have that be disjointed. So that's very important when you're creating your vision and you're marketing yourself as a key supplier. Our key suppliers know where they kind of fit what we need. So that's another thing, assessing what your customer may need in terms of cost, speed, quality, and rarity. And then being able to fit that and then speak to in the next point there, speaking to the elements of your operation that fit into those key kind of pivot points or key selling points for your product. And that is by expertise, operations, communication, delivery, and solutions. So we're going to talk a little bit more about those in the next slide, so I won't harp too much on them right now, but we kind of fit those two bullets together and showed what a really, really fantastic supplier looks like in theory in these different elements. So that said, I'll go ahead and pop over to the next slide. And I'll do just a little bit more review on this one because it will come into play quite a bit today on how to kind of resolve any problems or issues that we have in these different areas. So this is kind of the baseline. So a very, very good, in practice, a very good supplier, you'll have trust and they will have integrity. And that's two of the main things that you're, really trust is integrity is being trustworthy, being worthy of that trust, and then having trust in the supplier. So they're very closely related, but one is integrity is building that operation that a vendor that you're going to be working with or a customer who you're going to be working with in that supply chain that they can rely on. And so these different areas, the expertise, operations, communications, delivery, and solution areas, we broke out into some higher level ideas of what will make this, or higher level elements of what make a very good supplier. One within expertise is knowledge of industry, knowledge of operations, knowledge of products. So just having a high level of understanding of what you're doing and why you're doing it and how you're doing it, who you're working with as far as a vendor, and then who you're selling to. Having a good, steeped in knowledge is very good for a supplier because, again, you're going to be networking and you're going to be in a relationship with a customer potentially, depending on how integrated you are. If you're an off-the-shelf type of a product, you may have less of a direct connection, but there will still be the opportunity to display your knowledge of industry anytime in the future that customer may need to understand more about your industry. If you have that level of knowledge, you're immediately someone they're going to go to, and that's the type of relationship that you can have, especially within your supply chain group. And again, I focus this at supply chain because a lot of the times these supply chain roles, you'll have sales roles potentially, and you'll have customer relation or vendor relation roles or hats that you'll wear, and that is essentially your internal and external supply chain. So you're going to have that. You're going to be the face of the organization a lot of times in a supply chain role. And having that knowledge of your operation and the customer's operation also, again, opens up that opportunity for future revenue sources. And we'll talk a little bit about that in the next slide as well. So then we go to operations, systems and processes. We talked a lot about that, about having, and I'll talk a lot about that today as well. Having systems in place, having a system of systems, and then processes within those systems that are defined and that you can maneuver, change, adjust rather than being a person-centered kind of operation. So if you have one person that has all the knowledge and they know how to do everything in your supply chain, they know how to invoice, they know how to do the inventory management, they know how to ship, they know how to do the whole thing, and that person walks away, if you don't have systems in place to capture what they're doing, that can be kind of a disaster. So, and that's one of the things we'll talk about. How do you resolve that? In the next slide. So then we talked about maintenance, and that's very, very important. I'm not going to harp on that a lot now because I will be talking a lot about that in the future slide. And then creating some element of overspeed. So having the ability to call one of your suppliers or call a customer. Well, really, customers are calling you in this case and saying, "Hey, we found out we need this material really quickly. Do you have any leverage point there? Have you factored that into your kind of operations mentality at all when you need to kind of speed that up? And do you have overspeed capability, or are you 100% capacity? And creating an operation doesn't even mean that you can't be 100% capacity, but that could look a little different when you're operating, as far as being able to build in lanes for adjustments. And then that kind of speaks into the delivery as well, the mutual flexibility, having a little bit of flexibility within your overall operation, to be able to accommodate some special needs and things like that. Can identify a supplier that is really a key supplier, because you can trust that if we really need something sent quickly, they have an expedite lane for us. Now, again, that's not always the best for every operation, but at least being able to factor that in as a potential element within your supply chain, and what you can do to help support your customers or to support your vendors, and at least have a plan and a strategy for that. A communication timely and precise. Again, timely. You don't want to tell somebody a month later that their delivery last month was going to be late. That type of a thing. So in supply chain, if like, good news doesn't age well, or I mean, bad news doesn't age well. So being able to get that out, of course, maintain your message. Creating the message and thinking through, doing some editing. That's where the precise comes in. Precise is, you don't want to leave things that are key pieces of information out. And an example of that could be like part number, or a specific part that's causing you a shortage. Let's say you have a glue that you use in your operation, and you're not able to get it in from the vendor because they're having subcomponent issues themselves. um, you know, if it's not proprietary, and it's not part of, like, if your bill of material already has that information out there, you might want to say, well, this is the product that's causing us issues. And the reason I mention that and specifically is I've seen many times in the past where, like, materials that are flowing through the supply chain often are used at multiple levels, even in different companies. So you might be talking to someone as a supplier, as a supply chain person, that has tons of that on hand in stock at their operation, at the company you're selling to, and you can say, hey, can we buy some of that from you, and whatnot. So having strategies like that in place can be important as far as that timely and precise information. And then again, obviously, you have to think of your operation and what is proprietary and what you don't want to pass along. All of that is kind of wrapped into that timely and precise communication. You want it to be out there in the right time. You don't want to be too late, you don't want to be too early, and you also want to be precise with what you're communicating. Again, you don't want a novel to be sent over in an email that somebody who has a crunch for time has to read, 40 pages of what's going on. Being precise and kind of explaining what is need to be known at the right time. And I just say, editing is a really is a really strong suit there. Um, the next step would be delivery and meeting deadlines, meeting expectations, and then mutual flexibility. Delivery we'll talk quite a bit about in the last slide, so I won't go heavy on it now. But meeting your deadlines as a supplier obviously was one of the key elements of being a supplier, especially when you're talking those four key elements: speed and quality, cost, and rarity. Being able to meet it, especially if you're focusing in on speed, that's most likely what a lot of your customers and a lot of customers that I've seen, it's one of their key elements, if not the key element in most, or it's at least a factor. So being able to meet those timely deliveries is extremely important. That creates a lot of the trust as well. When you say you're going to meet something and you meet it, we will talk a little bit in the next slides about how you fix it if you're not doing that currently. So I won't harp too much at this point. Meeting expectations, of course, that's what you're sending is what do you have the product in the box that you say is going to be in the box, meeting that expectation, and the quality issues and all of that can pop up do you meet the specs of what the person is buying? And then having some mutual flexibility. That one kind of works both ways. Having flexibility in your delivery schedule, which could be an expedite capability. Do you have the ability to reach out to your shipper and say, hey, we need this one overnighted? That can be something as simple as that, and then working out those details with your customer as well in a timely way. That goes back to the communication piece. And then the mutual flexibility comes in to play when you're kind of choosing who you sell to. If you start to get the feeling that your customer is always needs everything a month, sooner than they kind of quote at the beginning, and they're all the time haranguing, does your department and does your operation, can it accommodate that kind of regular requests, and what can that happen within your operation if that continually happens? Are you bumping other potential products in order to accommodate one customer that continually needs your delivery expedited, things like that? So just kind of considering that, and then having a plan for what you do in that case. And then finally, solutions, data-driven solutions, know your limits and take the extra step. So these are, kind of three key elements of a supplier, having the capability of using your data that's on hand, and that's having, electronic systems, digital systems in place that can capture some of that. It could be as simple as an Excel spreadsheet that you're able to use to have, some data in order to, drive solutions and accommodate change and whatnot. Or it could be all the way up to some very, AI driven in these days. And that's where a lot of things are going. We'll talk a little bit about that next week, about some potential solutions that are coming up and where supply chain is going. So a little plug for that. Knowing your limits, that kind of goes back a little bit to that overspeed in operations. It goes into your whole operation as far as, if you're in a supply chain role and you're quoting deliveries and you're quoting, when you're going to be able to build, as far as scheduling, when you're going to be able to build for folks, understanding your operation. It goes back to expertise a little bit, understanding your operation, knowing what you can and can't provide today. Not that you can't always provide it, especially, and not that you can't stretch to make deliveries at a higher level than you've ever done, but you need a little bit of data that shows you're on that trajectory, and then reaching out to say 50% more than you've ever delivered in any month ever. That might be a little bit of a stretch. Perhaps you can accommodate, but understanding that from a supply chain perspective, especially when you're quoting and whatnot, can be very, very important. So knowing your limits and understanding what you have the capabilities to do in your operation is very important. And then again, taking the extra step, that's just, I mean, that's common pretty much anywhere in any operation. When you do a little extra, when you're able to provide a little bit of extra information, a little extra help, when you're listening perhaps for problems that your customers or your vendors are having, and maybe you don't have an immediate solution, or maybe you can't solve it for them, but you can help them get on the right track. Little things like that where you reach out and then you follow up. Hey, were you able to find out some information on that? One or two little things like that can really position you from the rest of the crowd when you're looking for, as a supply chain person. This doesn't even have to be in sales. As a supply chain person who's communicating with a group, you might be talking to the person who is buying and selling at whoever you're working with, whether you're working with a customer you're delivering to or working with a vendor who's delivering to you. You might be talking to the person who, suggests suppliers for certain things. So if you're willing to take that extra step, just that could position you for future business and future revenue opportunities. So looking out for that, that's a hallmark of a good solid supplier. So I will take a pause right here real quick and see if there's any questions about where we go. And this is kind of a review to this point. So I
No
will.
questions so far, Adam.
Okay. Thank you, Dave. Let's go ahead and jump now into this week. So we've done kind of a longer review, but wanted to lay the foundation of what a really fantastic supplier might look like. And then, how do you assess your operation in terms of expertise, operations, communication, delivery, and solutions? So we're going to go through each of these and kind of assess, which is that in and of itself is a very, very key element, as we all know, for process improvement initiatives. You have to first know that you have an issue. You have to first know that there's some sort of a deficit. So assessing your operation and having those at least an idea up front of what your standards should be, what you should look like, and then going into each of these different elements and determining do we see a deficit there? You assess it, and then how do you fix it if you find a deficit? So in expertise, if you find that your let's say your supply chain folks are on calls, and you just don't really understand, you may not even recognize that there's a potential for you to have a product line. Somebody says, well, we really need you to build X, Y, and Z a certain way, and you're like, oh well, we don't really do that, so sorry. You know, that might not be the answer. The answer could be, well, yeah, our operations can do that. All we have to do is change over the machine a little bit, and we're able to, add whatever it is, or we're able to do that, that little custom piece. It might cost a little bit more because it's custom, but having that opportunity to understand that on the front end as a supply chain person who may just be in a discussion about quality. Maybe supplier quality or vendor quality. You might be in a discussion kind of off the books about something completely different, but this opportunity presents itself. That's where we go back to the expertise of the operation, and you say, do you have any cross training? Do you have any walkthroughs that are done to give your supply chain folks areas of knowledge that might not on its face seem like they would need to have a really deep understanding of operations, but maybe if there's some of an operations understanding, they can kind of create those opportunities for solutions right then and there. And then also some sort of a defined training plan within your supply chain operation. And I say progressive. So taking somebody from where they come in, somebody who has no supply chain experience or maybe no experience with your operation, and getting them set up for success over a longer period of time by introducing them to either standard training that you have, on the job training with folks. Do you have anything there that can kind of frame out someone's pathway forward? And it doesn't have to be a 40-page in-depth training book with, a light show and the whole deal. It can just be kind of a standardized element of what is it that this person definitely need to know, what would be good to know, and then who are the folks that might be there to help them with that, and what are the expectations with that communication. Something as simple as that can take somebody, that learning curve can go steep really quick, and they can become much more kind of versed in your entire operation by just having a little bit of intentionality there up front. So that's one way that you can kind of resolve that issue, is just by framing out a bit of a training and a bit of a cross training essay and walkthroughs of areas. Specifically, if you're able to identify like an area of operations that someone in supply chain may regularly have questions about, give them POCs in the area to talk to, give them, a walkthrough of that area and what it might look like. And if there's any new news coming out about that area, maybe you attach them to the email chains, or maybe, you kind of load them up. Now, that's not always the best way of getting the communication. That's kind of why I say walkthroughs, because on site, generally speaking, in my experience, on site or direct communication usually works a little better to stick. But at least keeping them involved in the discussion. Do you do that? And that's one way of overcoming that expertise gap. Second area is within operations. And so, and this is one I harp on in almost every communication I do like this, or any kind of teaching or any kind of growth, is creating system frameworks versus people frameworks. I'm very big on system orientation, as you can tell probably from the past from the past three webinars that I've done. But the reason being is systems can more easily be adjusted than people. And generally speaking, a system that is maintained and a system that is defined can be added to, can be pivoted, and also that data and the kind of the processes and operations piece isn't necessarily lost. It might not be perfect, it might not be extremely fleshed out, but at least if you have it written out and there is a framework and there is a system in place and a way of doing things, it makes it a little bit easier for, if somebody wins the lottery, say you have a supply chain person and they, again, earlier I said kind of they know how to stock everything, they know how to bring it in, they're the ones who communicates with the suppliers that are your vendors, and they know all the different people that are there, and they're the only person in your operation that does that. They're the only person that has that communication channel. Maybe they're the only person, you kind of get single threaded, and I say that a lot too. Single threads for information when it comes to people can be very, very, very detrimental if that person wins the lottery and walks away from your operation. So identifying single threads, it's the same thing we do on an operations line. When we're looking for ways to improve our throughput on a manufacturing line, we're looking for the bottlenecks. Well, just because it's an intangible doesn't mean you're not still looking for bottlenecks. You're looking for those people who might be your bottleneck, or who might be the only person that owns a specific piece of information. So there needs to be some sort of a plan for backing that up. And that plan would be your systems framework. So you would have, generally speaking, a system of systems. And then within those systems, there are processes, and are those processes documented? So building all of this is extremely, in my view, very important for the longevity of an operation. And again, it doesn't mean that they can't be changed or pivoted. It doesn't have to be set in stone, just documented so that you don't have to start from scratch if someone leaves. Um, Part B is almost, if not more important than creating the systems, is a maintenance plan for ensuring that those systems um, stay reviewed, assessed, and clean, right? Because a lot of these types of systems, and you'll start to see like the building ideology behind it, a lot of these systems will be the baseline for data sets that you'll get. So if you have systems in place, oftentimes you can, there's information that needs to be collected or added or grown out of those systems, and that information turns into an Excel spreadsheet or some sort of a document that then you can start tracking things. And when you start tracking those things on Excel documents, then you start to create metrics of where you should be, where you're not. All of those types of things are the foundational elements of building that system out in order to really make it work for you and be make data-driven decisions versus just gut decisions. Sometimes we'll have to make gut decisions. I don't want to harp on that either, because I think sometimes that does come up, and we don't have that data set to make our decisions off of. And especially if it's a quick decision, you're not going to have time, to collect data for 6 months in order to, pull the trigger on something. But the more of those you have in place, and again, that maintenance plan for ensuring that the data sets and that system continues to remain, if it's a quick document that you've created, just making sure that it's updated. And how do we do? Well, I don't know, put something on your schedule once every 6 months to review your three, data sets or your data plans that you put in place, or your systems that you have there, just to ensure that, if anything news popped up, that type of thing is being very intentional with structuring your time, which is another thing I was going to harp on a lot today. Creating that structure and creating that time frame for assessing, and that's part of that maintenance plan, is throwing something on your calendar that blocks it off, that gives you a specific time to address a specific future state. What that does is it takes us from being in a whack-a-mole situation where anything that pops up is what we kind of hammer down, and it gets us to be more forward thinking. And so rather than reacting, we're proactive. And again, it's a hard transition if you're in a system, which I've seen and I've gone through many times, where you're in a whack-a-mole situation, or you're in a reactive situation, to try to transfer over into a proactive situation. Some things will be reactive, they'll remain, but it's taking those intentional steps on the front side to create that baseline system, then creating a maintenance plan for that system that allows you to be able to make sure that you're keeping the longevity of that plan that you put in place. I know I've harped a lot on that one, but this one to me is one of the biggest improvements you can make kind of right off of the bat in any operation, including supply chain. If you know that you're going to need to invoice at a certain time, or you're going to need to reorder supplies at a certain time, all of those things can be put onto a schedule and a system, and then all of those things can have a maintenance element added in, so that you ensure that you're putting eyes on that system regularly at this stated date and time, so that it doesn't get out of whack. Again, making data-driven decisions, which is the last one, data-driven solutions and assessments. If the data isn't good, then it's kind of worthless. We don't want to make data-driven decisions off of worthless data. So again, that maintenance plan comes into play right there as well, to ensure that that is a clean system of data. And one thing I will note there too is data systems that get too unwieldy and there's too many factors, can be very difficult to use for actionable intelligence. It might be good at a very high level to put on a chart and say these are all the things that are working. But if you're at kind of an operations level, especially within like your supply chain group, making a kind of a simple data set that you base your decisions off of. What I always say is if you can't pull a lever based off of the data and and be able to address or have an impact on a part of your operation, then maybe that data set isn't exactly what you want to be looking at. Maybe you want to refine it a little bit and kind of bring it down to an element of operations level. So that is the data-driven solutions piece. The communication for timely, again, I kind of made this comment earlier. Bad news doesn't age well. So a timely communication of information is extremely important. And so again, if you can recognize that your communications channels are if your communications channels are lagging, that could be an element of that you can change, again, as well. Waiting till Monday to send out an email about, a delivery that's going to be late on Wednesday, might not give your customer the time to pivot where they could pivot if they need to. So if you know about it on Thursday, the week before, you go ahead and collect that information, get all of it together, be precise, but like let that be known so that they can adjust, and maybe you can come up with a solution. If it's something within your operation that's causing it to lag, you might not have an immediate solution, but maybe your customer comes back and says, well, that's totally fine. We don't need it until then anyway, and it's not a big deal. Or maybe they come up with another solution of something, a partial deliveries or anything like that could potentially happen. But the timeliness of the communication definitely makes a big difference. And the precision of the communication there. And I mentioned a lot about that on the last slide, so I won't say too much now. But the precision, is, again, I said quality over quantity. It's just editing, making sure you're editing your emails a little bit, making sure that you're looking back and inserting, that data or that piece of information that might need to be in there, rather than saying, hey, your delivery is going to be late. Your communication might look something like, we found this element of this problem, and this is what's happening with it. We've got this solution for you. We're going to get it out on this date, but we were wondering if we might be able to do X, Y, and Z. So if you come with a little bit more, still precise, still clean, given a little bit more information of what's causing the slowdown, that kind of thing can play big to a customer and say, okay, you're coming with a solution and not just the problem as well. So that's the precision of the communication piece. All right, checking the time there. I will pause just a second. So are there any questions on the expertise, operations, communication?
No questions so far, Adam, but a comment that came up in the chat was a key takeaway from this is that having a good process in place for things is vital to success.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I would say a documented process. Again, processes are great if they're just known by an individual. It's great if an individual has a really good process. It's even better if that individual has given the time to document that process so that it can be used as a documentation for training. So the next person that needs to come in and do it, guess what? They've got something you can hand them on the day of. And then also, you don't lose that information if that person leaves the company, so you've got that documented out. So yes, absolutely. And then the maintenance of that. So you don't want to have a bunch of old documentation from, 2006 that doesn't really apply anymore. So that's why you say, yes, the system is creating the, that element of whatever it is you're doing. The process is how you're doing it. The documentation of that process and then the maintenance of that piece ensures that stays up to date. And then again, you're solving more problems with just one. That's why when you start to become more proactive in proactive thinking, you start to create solutions for yourself down the road that you didn't even necessarily realize. So in multiple operations that I've been involved in, we started making documentation that wasn't there just because it was helpful to us the day of. Well, then we started thinking, well, let's flesh this out a little bit more. Next thing you know, we have this nice piece of information, this piece of documentation, and we had somebody literally leave the company, and we said, oh shoot. Oh, well, we're bringing somebody in kind of lickety split to take over. And this person was very, very key, but we just so happened to have created this document that was a perfect training document for the next person coming in. So it ensures the stability of your operation when you have those processes, you have them documented, you have them maintained regularly, and then you are able to use those for training. You're able to use those for a kind of a pathway for cross training and creating a backup, which I think is also very important. I mentioned earlier, if you have that one person there who always communicates with your vendors, bringing someone in to that discussion on occasion that would be their backup, first identifying a backup in case you need somebody to reach out to customers or reach out to vendors, and then having them introduced and brought in semi-regularly as kind of a cross-training element, as well as just getting that name and that face out there and understanding a little bit of that. They don't have to be in depth. They don't have to know everything that that person knows. But if you have that backup who has where your customers or vendors can have a name and a face and understand that there's some kind of a longevity of the operation, some backups, it creates a little bit more of that that element of trust that we're trying to gain. So yeah, absolutely, I couldn't agree more with having processes in place that are documented. And again, doesn't have to be, Pride and Prejudice. It doesn't have to be, 1,000 pages long, but having a framework of what you're doing and how you're doing it is really, really key for long-term success. Good comment. So yeah, I'll jump in now to delivery. Oh man, I knew this one was going to be a hard one to keep into the timeline because I really love this is the bread and butter. This is what I love to do. So it is 12:41 now. So I'll try to wrap these two up and then hit the last slide. So for delivery, meeting deadlines, meeting expectations, and that's kind of a quality. I kind of noted that as quality because there could be potential quality issues there, and then flexibility. So how do you ensure that your operation is set up for success there, and what do you do if you see some deadlines aren't being met? I think it can be. That's a difficult one because there can be subcomponent issues. There can be your vendor issues that pop up. It can be a lot of different reasons as to why. I think a key is to recognize that if you can create kind of somewhat high level standardized processes or ways of potentially solving deadline issues that can be somewhat standard. And I mentioned it earlier, having a way of expediting delivery, with your shipping department that you're using either internally or both internally and externally if you're using an external shipper or shipment company. Have you talked to them about, getting quick turns and what that might look like, on a day that you don't have a quick turn, because sometimes it's too late at that point. So what do you do, and what are the levers you need to pull to do that? So just having a kind of a system in place for, oh shoot, we got to get this out the door quick. We already know how to do it. This is how you do it. You got to call this person. You have to have this documentation. You have to have this put on it. You put it in this location. You call this person. They're going to pick it up and send it out. That's how, having that already set up and that structure and that process in place before you ever meet that. That's one of the ways that you can at least prep for the potential to have a delivery issue. If it's a longer term delivery issue, again, communication with vendors, communication with your customers, and understanding what their true needs are. One solution of many could be, partial deliveries. If you're delivering 500 of something, can they take 100 at a time until you've reached that quantity? And little things like that might get them moving. They might not for their operation at the next kind of link on that supply chain. They might not need all 500 early on. They might just buy them that way because it's how they've always done it. Right. Well, if they can use 100, monthly deliveries or bi-weekly deliveries, then maybe that's a solution that you have. And just talking through that again in a timely manner with precise communication, that can alleviate some of those delivery issues and deadline issues that you might be seeing. And then again, prepping for what may happen and having a solution on the front side for potential. If you get into the potential, deadline or delivery issues, is a very kind of key practice. Let me jump down to solutions here. So data-driven, defining parameters and looking for opportunities. So these are some elements of your operation that a key one is looking for opportunities. I know I've mentioned that a couple times, both in this and in the last webinar. Looking for opportunities to support that. That can be opportunities to help your customers, help your vendors, but also what you're doing there is you're building that goodwill. And for those opportunities, and you can also look for opportunities while you're doing that, while you're networking and creating that relationship. You can look for opportunities for other potential revenue sources. So that's kind of the give and take there. It's kind of the both and, if you will, for creating those good networking relationships. Being able to identify those operations where you're just able to help somebody, that's going to build goodwill and trust. And if you also identify those areas that you can help somebody and potentially gain more revenue from it, by delivering, maybe it's a knowledge. You send somebody who has a really high level of knowledge of your operation over to help them with something a customer is lacking in knowledge. You can do a series of trainings for their folks or something, and you charge whatever you charge, and you've got another revenue stream there. So being on the lookout for opportunities like that can help everybody. We all win, and you create that element of trust and integrity within your operation. And let me go ahead, and I won't hit defining perimeters because I'm going to talk a little bit more about solutions on the next page. So let me go ahead and hit that. So this is distillation of kind of what I talked about there on the last slide. This is kind of distilling it down to some key items that you can maybe take home with you, a few key elements that will be helpful. And again, I put rebuilding integrity and trust. It could be building integrity and trust, and I don't mean that in kind of a negative way, because sometimes we get into operational kind of flow and we don't even realize that something isn't up to the level at which we wish it was up to. And so again, that's why assessing the operation is really important and finding those opportunities to be better, which is, that's just a system of process improvement. That's what we should all be looking to do, improving our processes, becoming the best supplier we can be, having the best operation we can have should always be in the back of our mind. How can I be a little better? And so again, this is just, it's not necessarily even that you've done something wrong. It's just, how do we gain that next level of trust or that next level of integrity and become that key supplier where we may be a supplier of many suppliers that are on the market, but how do we distinguish ourselves as the key supplier? And the first one I say, with the expertise, create a well-defined training strategy. Now plans are built out of strategy. So how this goes into operation can be done maybe at a managerial level within your groups and organizations, specifically supply chain in this one. But creating kind of an overall strategy of what the expectation is for training within your group. What should these different operators within your supply chain group or wearing the supply chain hats, what should they know, and which groups are involved there? So at least having a strategy of, well, we know we want them to learn a little bit of this, a little bit of that. And then you can kind of go down to your next level of the plan that you put in place of how to make that happen. That can be your cross training element, that can be your walkthrough element, or your side saddling, whatever you do to train, the documentation that you want to use that we talked about, and having that process and having it documented. Maybe you're able to show them some of that documentation and walk them through that process and give them a better understanding of what you're doing in operations so that they can communicate that to your customers and vendors as well. So then operations, use data to create system of systems and a maintenance plan. I won't drive any more into this. I'm sure you're probably sick of hearing me talk about this one. But I do believe very deeply in a system of systems and a maintenance plan for those systems, and taking it out of that realm of your single-threaded, person-based operations, and creating a systems-based operation so that you can adjust and tweak and change, and you can move people in, you can move people out. Because again, you don't want to even have, maybe it's your person that's there, that's the bread and butter that does everything. Maybe you need them at a higher level. Maybe they need to be moved out for your operation purposes, or maybe it's because they're growing within their career and they're going to move out of this operations element and be at a higher level, maybe decision-making element where they have less hands-on. If they leave, you don't want all of those operations to fall apart. It's just that kind of that thought process of going in and making sure that you've got that system of systems and that maintenance plan to ensure that those systems stay up to date, and that the data and that the processes within those systems are accurately representing reality. For communication, timely, don't wait, and precise, key and quick info. And again, edit your emails. Make sure that you're saying what you want to say and that it sounds like what you want it to sound like, especially if you're delivering bad information or information that's not going to be well received or potentially might not be well received. My standard go-to is to always create the solution as well. Send the solution in with the communication. So for delivery, Okay, and this one's kind of a little bit longer, so I will kind of touch a little bit more on this one, but proper forecasting based on data. So that's creating those systems, creating that data. If you have it, again, it can be as simple as a Word document or an Excel spreadsheet where you're capturing some of that data. Even if it's little bits and you're building a system over time, if you just start somewhere by collecting some of that pertinent information. Delivery times for vendors. Maybe you don't have a system that's capturing that now. Maybe you can create a quick system that will show you, say you have 25 vendors that you work with regularly and you see delivery times. You can start using that data over time for all of the deliveries. If you have regular deliveries, maybe you start to catch, oh, shoot, we have two vendors who almost every time deliver a week late. Or every three or four deliveries, they're delivering, a week or a day. If you can start to create an understanding of those types of regular and kind of repeatable, we'll call them offenses, but repeatable data. And then it starts to create a trend line. And then you can start basing, well, maybe we just need to order a week earlier that material. If they're going to be a week late, and you can go the punitive route and find a new vendor, or you say, well, everything we get from them is great. They're just a little late sometimes. They're not as consistent. Maybe you can build that into their delivery schedule for that specific vendor. But the only way you might be able to see that is by collecting that data and then using that data to your advantage. And it can be very simple. It doesn't have to be very, very deep, or very, a crazy system of data collection. Regular periodic assessment. That's what we've been talking about the whole time. So I won't harp on that again. And then a reasonable reach. I kind of mentioned a little bit about that. Understanding your operation and having knowledge of your operation also includes understanding what might be just more than a stretch, what might not be achievable. Not that it won't ever be achievable. Again, with process improvement, it may be achievable next year, but making sure that you're reaching to the appropriate level, and not over, your eyes aren't too big for your stomach type of a thing, and that you're not over promising and under delivering, because that again takes a really, really long time to rebuild trust after you've lost it. And that's one of the quicker ways you can do it is when you're under delivering what you say you're going to deliver regularly. It can happen. If you're dealing with it and you've got systems in place to address it and you're giving solutions and the whole deal, you can still have that integrity and trust. But when it becomes a repeatable offense and it's over and over again that you're just under delivering, you're not meeting your deliveries, you're not meeting what you said you're going to be with quality and whatnot, that can create a trend. And then it creates that thought that, well, we can't trust that group. We can't trust that they're going to deliver on time. That's not where you want to live. So just being able to really understand your capacities, your throughputs, and all that good stuff for your operation, especially as a supply chain person, when you're quoting those things, understand what you're able to do, and stretch every now and then if that's your deal. There's nothing wrong with that, but make it within the realm of possibility.
And Adam, we had a question come in along those lines. Sorry to interrupt you.
Sure, no,
Uh,
great.
for a small new operation in particular, how do you scale up the business while ensuring reliability? Basically, how do you make sure you don't overpromise early on?
That's a really good question. Um, there's multiple theories. You have the rapid expansion theory of, we'll just add people, add people, add people, do your best and just get there. And slowly you're going to gain more and more and more business, especially if you're rapidly building that client base. If you'll probably be able to tell where I come from on this one by, by how I say slow and steady wins the race. Look for long-term successes. Again, this is a marathon. It's not a sprint. What I would say with that is, again, setting yourself up for success by creating the very best small scale operation you can. And then another thing you can think of is when you're setting up your small scale operation, think, how can this plug into a larger scale operation? Okay. And what that might look like is this. And I'm actually doing this in another with another group right now, where we are building technological systems out. And we know that we're not going to be able to build into the current software systems that are on the market right now. But we're looking downstream at what will likely be where those systems go in about 2026 or 2027. And we're trying to integrate that with the most likely way they're going to have their technology set up so that we can create that connection point with what we're building up today. And we're using kind of rudimentary basic systems with the opportunity, with the processes that surround those systems, and the opportunity for those systems to plug right into those 2027 level systems that are coming. So again, that's kind of a strategic long-term vision. And with again, you got to have resource management that comes involved with your kind of decisions that you're making today. Do you have the resources to do things like that? Um, you may or may not. You have to assess that on your own personal level. But being able to recognize where your company is likely to go and start creating those plugins. I think one of the best things you can do as a small business is start to structure your specific time correctly so that you're addressing things. And again, I kind of mentioned it earlier, setting up your calendar to block off specific times for addressing future state and those elements of growth so that you're not just playing whack-a-mole all the time. That's really important. That will set you up for success. There's a lot of things like that you can do. And then when you're assessing whether or not you'll take on a customer, there has to be that point. I would say as much data as you can get based off of what your current throughput is. But scaling up is, you know, it it's interesting. I mean, it kind of boils down to an individual conversation. So I'm trying to give general information that will help you with an individual conversation, but a lot of the times there's a lot of individual elements that come into play um, for a specific. So if you're going to take on a client that is, asking you to do 2 or 3 times what you've ever been able to do before, if you don't already have a plan for scaling your business to that level, and they're looking for a delivery next month, you kind of answered your question. However, if you think that there's that possibility, starting to get those quotes for manufacturing equipment early, things like that, and then looking at your supply chain as far as like what you're able to get from your vendors. Are they able to scale up and rapidly increase? Because you might have vendors who aren't able to meet your maybe you're building 500 a day, you want to build 10,000 next year. Do the vendors that you have as sending you subcomponents, are they able to scale to that point? So you might have to do vendor analysis and understand what your vendors are able to do. So a lot of that stuff has to be done kind of on the fly. But again, saying that if you can foresee that happening in your group, perhaps you start asking those questions early on, like, we're building 500 this year, but I know we've got a lot of interest in our products, so we might have to scale up a lot. We're buying 500 from you today. Do you think you would be able to scale to, 10 times that, over the span of a year, starting to have those conversations with your vendors and understanding what their capabilities are. And if they're not, doesn't mean you don't use them as a vendor necessarily, but you might need another vendor. So maybe you go on the hunt for another vendor who can provide that subcomponent. Little things like that you can do in process while you're having those discussions. But again, it's assessment of your operation, seeing where you want to go, where you are today, and then developing that question set before you get on that phone call with your vendors. So knowing what you need to ask them early on can be helpful as well. So I hope that answered the question. It's a big question for a little teeny bit of time. Yeah. So it looks like we have some another operation question, or at least pitching advice from or guidance from Stacy and David at the MEP team. Yeah, I'm sure. Again, I'm one person. There's a lot of knowledge on that team as well. Who are going to be able to certainly help. So absolutely, yeah, yeah. I mean that might be a very good question for David and team who can answer to a degree that is much more detailed than what I can answer. Very good question though. Very good question. Looks like we have about 2 minutes. Any other questions there before I wrap up real quick? Good one. All right, let me go ahead and hit the solutions piece. I'll just kind of say what it says there. You all can all read it, but it says expertise, development, data, and systems development, and then regular assessment. I've talked about all those the whole time. I won't harp on them throughout the last 2 minutes of our conversation, but that is very important. Developing and continuing to grow, process improvement, as the comment mentioned there. I mean, you have a great group of folks here who are very, very, very adept at answering a lot of that process improvement type questions. I know that they have folks there who are fantastic at that. So if you have questions like that individually for your operation, the MEP group is fantastic. So I would definitely go to them with direct questions and support requests as well. And then finally, I made a little note about this. And I mentioned it a little bit earlier, and this does not do this justice at all. It's kind of a little footnote on the bottom of a of a note here, or a note card. But root cause and root cause analysis is extremely important. There are many books that are written on this, so this doesn't do this idea justice. But getting to the root cause of what's causing the issues overall for all of the things that I've spoken about today, and not just kind of polishing the apple, I like to call it, getting to to the root. So an apple can be rotten in the core, but you polish it and you try to make it good, and you jump to the next apple, you try to polish that. We really, all you're doing is you're polishing something that isn't getting to the symptom. You know, you're taking care of the symptoms of the disease roots, and you're not actually getting to the root cause. So that's really important as well. And again, I think the WVUIE team there can do a lot more than I could in the last minute for kind of discussing root cause analysis and being able to assess your operation. So if you have any more questions, I'm happy to answer them. Absolutely. I love questions like that. But you also have a fantastic team of people here who are able to help as well.
Yeah, for anybody who has questions, feel free to reach out to myself or Jamie Cope. We can connect you with a practice manager in our group to help with the specific area you're questioning. Also, a couple of questions have come up in the chat. Tracy will be sending out links to the previous sessions as well as this one shortly after. So look for those in your email if you've missed one of the earlier ones or want to catch up on them. I know we've come up on 1 o'clock on time. If anybody wants to stick around and ask questions about them, I'm happy to stay here with everybody, but also want to be aware of everybody's time. So with that, I'd like to say, thanks everybody for attending. Adam, thanks again for a great session with some really good content. With that, I'll open it back up to questions, or we'll see where it goes. All right, looks like people were falling off one by one, so I'm going to guess they're hungry or had to go to another meeting or back to work.
Mm-hmm. Or all of the above.
Could definitely be a D, all of the above situation.
Yeah. Well, thanks all who all are left on. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
You too.